The night everything broke down. The rain began like a whisper, tapping against the cracked windshield of Amelia's old sedan. She had been driving for 5 hours straight, chasing a promise that barely existed anymore, a job interview that might finally pull her out of the endless cycle of struggle. The highway stretched endlessly before her, glistening under the amber lights, reflecting her exhaustion. Every mile felt heavier than the last. Her hands clutched the steering wheel not out of control, but out of fear. Fear of stopping, fear of losing, fear of being forgotten by a world that seemed to move on without her. She had just $30 left in her wallet, and the gas gauge needle had been threatening to betray her for the last 20 minutes. She told herself she could make it to the next town. She told herself she always did. But life, like the storm outside, had its own plans. The car sputtered once, twice, then died with a soft mechanical sigh right in front of a small, dimly lit garage at the edge of the highway. The neon sign flickered weakly. Riley's Auto Service. It wasn't the kind of place that promised comfort or warmth, but at that moment, Amelia didn't care. She stepped out into the cold rain, her shoes soaking through instantly, her coat offering little protection against the biting wind. The air smelled of oil, rust, and something faintly metallic, the scent of effort, of labor, of people who built and fixed things with their hands. She pushed open the door to the garage and was greeted by the faint hum of an old radio playing a forgotten song from another decade. Inside, under the soft glow of a single hanging bulb, stood a woman, her back turned, her body silhouetted against the steam of a welding torch. She was tall, with broad shoulders and hair pulled into a loose ponytail streaked with grease and gold under the light. When she turned, Amelia saw eyes that were as tired as they were kind, the kind of eyes that had seen loss but refused to harden. The woman wiped her hands on a rag and looked up, surprised to see anyone at this hour. "Garage is closed," she said at first, her voice low and rough like gravel under rain. I just broke down outside," Amelia said softly, pointing toward her car through the fogged window. "I didn't know where else to go." The woman's gaze shifted, and something changed in her expression. Not pity, but recognition. She sighed, tossing the rag onto the counter. "Keys?" Amelia blinked. "What?" "Keys," the woman repeated, extending her hand. "You want it looked at, or you just want to stand there freezing?" Amelia handed them over without a word. The mechanic, Riley, as her name was stitched faintly on her worn blue coveralls, walked out into the rain without hesitation. Through the window, Amelia watched as Riley opened the hood with practiced precision, her movements steady and confident. Even from inside, Amelia could see the intensity in the way Riley worked. Fast, efficient, completely focused. After 10 minutes, Riley came back, her hair damp, her face illuminated by the workshop light. "Transmission's gone bad," she said bluntly, setting the keys on the counter. "You're not going anywhere tonight." Amelia's heart sank. "How much will it cost?" $500, give or take. It was like a punch. She had expected bad news, but not this bad. $500? She repeated, her voice cracking slightly. I don't have that kind of money right now." Riley looked at her for a long moment, then turned away, pulling a stool from the corner. "Then you'll have to leave it here until you do." Amelia swallowed hard. "But I have an interview tomorrow morning. I need to get to the city by 9. Please, there must be something you can do." Riley's eyes softened slightly. "Where are you heading?" "Greenville," Amelia said. "It's an hour from here." "Not with that car, it isn't." Riley leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "You shouldn't be driving in this weather anyway." For a few moments, the only sound was the radio crackling faintly. Amelia looked down at her hands, trembling from cold, exhaustion, and something else. She had no one to call. No family waiting. No friend who could wire her money. The weight of everything she'd been holding back suddenly pressed on her chest. Riley must have seen something in her expression, because her tone softened again. "There's a cot in the back room," she said quietly. "It's not much, but it's dry." "You can stay until morning." Amelia looked up, startled. I don't want to trouble you." "It's not trouble. Just don't expect breakfast service," Riley said with the faintest hint of a smile. That was the first time Amelia saw her smile. Small, quiet, but real. She nodded, grateful beyond words. Riley handed her a clean towel and led her through the garage to a small back room behind a curtain. It smelled faintly of motor oil and lavender soap, an oddly comforting mix. The cot was simple, with a worn blanket and a small lamp beside it. Riley turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Lock the door from inside. This area's not exactly friendly at night," she said, then hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "And stay with me tonight, just in case the power goes out or something. It's safer up front." Amelia blinked. The word sounded strange at first, whispered like a secret, but there was nothing inappropriate in Riley's tone. It was protective, sincere, and unexpectedly gentle. After a moment's hesitation, Amelia nodded. She followed Riley back to the front of the shop, where a small heater buzzed beside an old couch. Riley tossed her a dry sweatshirt. "Here, it's clean, I think," she said with a faint grin. "Thank you," Amelia murmured, pulling it on. It smelled like engine grease and sunshine, a strange comfort she didn't expect. For a while, they sat in silence, the storm raging outside. Riley sipped from a chipped mug of coffee, her eyes distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. Amelia wanted to speak, to ask her who she was, what kind of person stayed up fixing broken things for strangers in the middle of nowhere. But the warmth, the safety, the quiet hum of the radio, it all wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time in months, she felt herself exhale. After what felt like hours, Amelia finally spoke. "You work here alone?" Riley nodded. "Always have. No family?" A shadow flickered in Riley's eyes. "Not anymore," she said softly. Amelia didn't ask further. She knew that tone, the one that came from a heart that had learned to stop explaining its pain. When the lights flickered from the storm, Riley got up and grabbed a flashlight from the shelf. The beam caught a small photograph taped to the wall, a younger version of Riley, smiling beside a woman who looked almost identical to Amelia. Same hair, same smile, same freckle near the corner of her lip. Amelia stared. "Who's that?" she asked quietly. Riley froze, then turned off the flashlight. "No one," she said quickly, her voice low. But Amelia knew that look, grief mixed with guilt. She didn't push, but the silence between them grew heavier. The wind howled outside, and somewhere in that moment, two broken lives, one searching for a way forward, the other still haunted by what was lost, found an unexpected connection in the middle of nowhere. Riley sat back down, setting the flashlight aside. "You remind me of someone," she said finally. Amelia smiled faintly. "Someone you cared about?" "Someone I failed," Riley whispered. The clock ticked softly. Neither spoke again for a long time. The heater hummed, the rain softened, and the night wrapped around them like a secret. In that quiet garage, two strangers, both lost in different ways, began to heal. Without realizing it, and as Amelia drifted toward sleep, she caught one last image through half-closed eyes, Riley leaning back, staring at the photograph, her hand trembling slightly. There was a softness in her face that spoke of regret, of promises broken, of roads left behind. The storm outside faded into silence, and Amelia didn't know if she was dreaming when she heard Riley whisper again, so quietly that only the rain could carry it. "You're safe here, Amelia. You're safe now." The morning after the storm. When Amelia opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the silence. The rain had stopped, and sunlight filtered weakly through the high windows of the garage, scattering golden reflections on the oil-stained floor. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The faint smell of coffee and machine oil brought her back. The couch beneath her was rough but warm, the kind of comfort that didn't come from money or luxury but from safety, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and saw Riley across the room, already at work, Her coveralls rolled to the elbows, her hair still slightly damp from the morning air. There was music playing low from the radio, an old country tune that seemed to echo in the cavernous space. Riley glanced over her shoulder, noticing her awake. "Morning," she said, her voice calm, a quiet tone that didn't demand but invited response. "Morning," Amelia replied softly, standing up, embarrassed that she'd fallen asleep there at all. She looked at the small folded blanket that had been placed over her sometime in the night. She hadn't done that. Riley had. "I made coffee," Riley said, nodding toward a metal thermos on the workbench. "It's not great, but it'll wake you up." Amelia smiled faintly. "Thank you." She poured some into a chipped mug, noticing the way Riley avoided eye contact. Not in discomfort, but in habit. She was the kind of person who had built invisible walls to keep the world from breaking what was left of her heart. Amelia recognized that instinct because she had done the same. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Riley tightened bolts and cleaned her hands on a towel. Amelia sipped her coffee slowly, trying to think of what to say. The events of the night before replayed in her mind. The storm, the broken car, the photograph on the wall, and Riley's quiet whisper, "You're safe here." It wasn't just a kind gesture. It had felt like a promise, one that carried years of untold stories behind it. "I should pay you something," Amelia said finally, breaking the silence. "Even if it's not the full 500, I can—" Riley interrupted softly. "Don't worry about it right now. I haven't even ordered the part yet. It'll take a couple of days." "A couple of days?" Amelia's heart sank. "But my interview—" "I know," Riley said, setting down the wrench. "You told me. But even if I worked through the night, your transmission's gone. I could fix the body of the car, but not the heart of it. You'd only end up stranded again." Amelia pressed her lips together, frustration welling up behind her eyes. The job she'd been hoping for wasn't just a job. It was her last chance to restart her life. The rent was due, her savings were gone, and she'd burned through every bridge she'd ever had. "I can't lose this opportunity," she said softly, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay composed. "I just can't." Riley watched her silently for a long moment, then turned and grabbed a set of keys from the hook by the door. "Come with me." Amelia blinked. "Where?" Riley didn't answer immediately. "There's a diner down the road. You look like you haven't eaten since last week." Amelia wanted to argue, to insist she needed to call the company or find a bus or something, but there was something grounding about the steadiness in Riley's tone. That quiet authority that didn't demand obedience, only trust. She followed her out the door into the crisp morning air. The world smelled fresh, washed clean by the storm. Riley's old pickup truck was waiting outside, scarred by years of work, but still reliable, just like her. They drove in silence for a while. The road cut through open fields that shimmered with dew. Amelia kept glancing at Riley, trying to read her. There was something both strong and fragile about her, as if every movement was weighed against invisible memories. Her jaw tightened. When they passed the small cemetery by the roadside, her knuckles whitening slightly on the steering wheel, Amelia didn't ask, but she noticed. The diner was small, with chipped booths and a bell that rang whenever the door opened. The waitress greeted Riley by name, which made Amelia realize this was her usual place. They took a seat by the window, and the waitress poured them coffee without asking. "You come here a lot?" Amelia asked, wrapping her hands around the mug for warmth. "Every day," Riley said simply. "It's quiet. People mind their own business." Amelia nodded. "That sounds nice." "It is." Riley paused, then added, "Most people don't." The conversation lingered there, heavy and unfinished. When breakfast arrived, 2 plates of scrambled eggs, toast, and hash browns, Amelia ate slowly, realizing how long it had been since she'd had a real meal. She caught Riley watching her a few times, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a quiet kind of concern that felt strangely personal. After they finished, Amelia leaned back, her mind racing. "Riley, can I ask you something?" "Sure. That picture in the garage, the one on the wall. Who was she?" Riley's hand froze on her coffee cup. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting Amelia's for the first time since they sat down. There was a long pause before she spoke. Her name was Claire. "Was?" "She died 3 years ago," Riley said quietly. "Car accident, hit and run." Amelia's breath caught. "I'm sorry." Riley nodded slightly. "She was my sister." The words hit Amelia like a quiet revelation. The resemblance suddenly made sense. The same hair, the same gentle curve of the smile. But something in Riley's tone told her there was more. "You said last night that you failed her," Amelia said carefully. "What did you mean?" Riley's gaze drifted to the window. The sunlight reflected off her eyes, making them glimmer with something raw. "We weren't speaking when it happened," she said softly. "We fought about stupid things. About how I was living, about the garage, about not moving on. She thought I was wasting my life, and I told her she didn't understand me. The last thing I ever said to her was that I didn't need her." The air between them grew still. Amelia didn't know what to say. Some pain didn't need words. It only needed silence that could hold it without judgment. "I never forgave myself," Riley continued. "When I saw you walk into the shop last night, for a second I thought I was seeing her again. The same eyes, the same voice when you said please. It felt like a second chance I didn't deserve." Amelia's heart ached. "You don't have to carry that forever," she said softly. Riley smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that came from deep scars. "Some things stick with you whether you want them to or not." They finished their coffee in silence. When they stepped back outside, the sky had cleared completely, the kind of blue that only comes after a storm. Fresh, vast, forgiving. As they walked toward the truck, Amelia turned to her. "I can't imagine what you went through," she said quietly. "But maybe you didn't fail her. Maybe you just didn't get a chance to say goodbye." Riley's eyes softened. "Maybe," she murmured. When they got back to the garage, Amelia felt different. Not just because of what she'd learned, but because of how human Riley suddenly seemed. Beneath all the rough edges, she was a woman carrying too much grief and still choosing to show kindness. That kind of strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and beautiful in its own broken way. As the day stretched on, Amelia tried to help around the shop. Riley didn't ask her to, but she couldn't just sit and do nothing. She swept the floors, organized tools, wiped down workbenches. Riley watched her once or twice, pretending not to smile. "You don't have to do that," she said eventually. "I know," Amelia said, "but it feels nice to be useful." Riley nodded, as though she understood that better than anyone. They spent the afternoon in near silence, the sound of tools and machines filling the space like unspoken music. There was no awkwardness between them, just two souls who didn't need words to recognize each other's pain. By evening, the world outside had softened into gold. Riley leaned against the hood of Amelia's car, wiping her hands on a rag. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was younger, I used to think fixing cars was just about making things run again. But it's not. It's about understanding. What broke? Finding the piece that doesn't fit anymore, and learning to replace it without hating the damage. That's what healing is, too." Amelia looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled without pretending. "You sound like someone who's done a lot of healing." Riley laughed softly, a sound Amelia hadn't heard from her before. "Or someone who's still learning." They shared that small, fragile laughter as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the garage in amber and rust. When Riley locked up for the night, she glanced at Amelia. The cot's still there. If you want to stay another night, she said, her tone casual but her eyes hopeful. Amelia hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, Riley. For everything. Riley shook her head lightly. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow I'll probably make you scrub the floor. Deal, Amelia said with a small grin. As night settled over the quiet highway once again, the garage lights flickered to life. Inside, two women, both broken in different ways, both searching for something they couldn't name, found themselves inching closer to peace. Not because they tried to, but because sometimes healing begins where kindness is given without reason. And when the wind rose softly outside, Amelia heard Riley's voice again. That same whisper from the night before, not quite meant to be heard, but impossible to forget. You're safe here. You can stay as long as you need. Amelia didn't answer. She didn't have to. She just sat quietly on the edge of the cot, watching the faint light of the workshop glow through the curtain, knowing for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The woman who fixed everything except herself. The following days melted into one another, quiet and slow, like honey dripping from the edge of time. Morning sunlight streamed through the high garage windows, cutting through the dust that hung in the air like soft gold. Amelia had never thought she would grow used to the sound of a wrench turning, the steady rhythm of engines coming back to life, or the faint hum of Riley humming under her breath as she worked. But she did. The garage became her world, a small, unexpected refuge from the noise of everything she had been running from. She woke early, brewed coffee before Riley did, and helped organize the tools even though Riley had never asked her to. There was something healing in the routine, the way steel met purpose, the way silence filled the spaces where words used to hurt. Riley, on the other hand, remained much the same, quiet, steady, guarded. She didn't talk much about her past, but the way she moved, the way her eyes softened when she caught Amelia laughing, spoke more than words could. Sometimes, in the middle of the day, Amelia would glance over and see Riley staring at the old photograph taped to the wall, the one of her and her sister Claire, and her chest would tighten with a mixture of sadness and admiration. Here was a woman who fixed everything that broke except herself. On the third morning, Amelia woke to the sound of rain again. It wasn't the angry storm from before, just a gentle drizzle that pattered softly on the roof. She stretched and walked into the front of the shop, expecting to see Riley already bent over a car, but instead found her standing near the doorway, staring out at the road. There was something strange in her posture, shoulders stiff, expression unreadable. You okay? Amelia asked softly, stepping closer. Riley turned slightly, forcing a small smile. Yeah, just thinking. About Claire? Riley nodded, her jaw tightening. It's her birthday today. Amelia hesitated, unsure if she should speak. Do you still visit her grave? Sometimes, Riley said. But it never feels right. I always feel like I'm talking to the wrong place. She turned back to the window, the reflection of her face soft in the glass. She used to tell me to live more, to stop hiding behind work. I never listened. Amelia took a deep breath. Maybe you're listening now? Riley looked at her then, her eyes meeting Amelia's for a long, quiet moment. There was no need for further words. Sometimes two people could stand in silence and understand each other completely. Later that day, Amelia offered to take over the front desk while Riley worked on an old pickup truck. Business was slow, just a couple of customers, most of whom seemed to know Riley by name. They greeted her with that particular small-town respect reserved for those who had earned it through consistency, not charm. Watching her, Amelia realized that Riley was more than just a mechanic. She was the kind of person who held her community together in quiet, invisible ways, fixing not only machines but moments in people's lives. During lunch, they sat together at the workbench, sharing sandwiches Riley had made. Amelia noticed the calluses on Riley's hands, the small scars that told stories of long days and hard work. You could have done anything, Amelia said suddenly, You're brilliant. Why stay here in this small town? Riley smiled faintly. Because people here still believe in fixing things instead of throwing them away. Out there? She nodded toward the open road beyond the garage. The world's too quick to replace what's broken. I guess I'm not built like that. Amelia thought about that for a long moment. You and I aren't that different, she said quietly. I spent so long trying to fix everything in my life. My job, my reputation, my family, and when it all fell apart, I thought maybe I was the thing that needed replacing. Riley looked at her, her expression softening. You're not broken, Amelia. You're just tired. There's a difference. The words sank deep, not as comfort, but as truth. Amelia didn't respond. She couldn't. She just nodded, feeling something unexplainable rise in her chest. A mixture of relief, gratitude, and something she didn't dare name. That evening, as they closed up shop, a man arrived, tall, sharp-featured, wearing a corporate jacket with a logo Amelia recognized instantly. It was from the same company she had applied to for her interview. Her heart jumped. He introduced himself as Mr. Turner, a regional manager who happened to be passing through town. You're Amelia Brooks, right? He said, glancing at his phone. We tried reaching you. You missed your interview in Greenville. Amelia's breath caught. I know, sir. My car broke down. He raised a hand. It's all right. We actually had another position open up here in town. It's a smaller office, but we're short on staff. If you're still interested, I could schedule a follow-up tomorrow. Amelia froze, disbelief flooding her. Here in this town? Turner nodded. Yes, temporary role, maybe 3 months. Could become permanent if things go well. Before she could respond, Riley spoke from behind her. She'll take it. Amelia turned, startled. Riley shrugged. You need a chance. Looks like it just found you. Mr. Turner smiled faintly. I'll send you the details tonight. With that, he shook Amelia's hand and left, his car tires crunching on the wet gravel as he disappeared down the road. When the sound faded, Amelia turned to Riley, her voice trembling slightly. Why did you do that? Riley smiled faintly. Because you've been helping me for days without asking for anything. Maybe it's time someone helped you. But I don't even know if I'm ready for that, Amelia said, emotion rising in her throat. I came here because everything fell apart. Riley stepped closer, her expression gentle. Maybe that's the best time to start again. You can't rebuild anything until you've taken it apart first. Amelia swallowed hard. You really believe that? I have to, Riley said simply. It's the only reason I'm still standing. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She lay on the cot, listening to the faint ticking of the clock and the soft hum of Riley working late. Her thoughts were tangled. Gratitude, confusion, fear, hope. She thought about how strange life was, how it sometimes tore you down only to lead you exactly where you needed to be. She wondered if Riley knew just how much she had changed her without even trying. Around midnight, she got up quietly and walked toward the main room. Riley was still there, bent over a table, sketching something on a piece of paper. Her face was illuminated by the warm light of a small lamp. What are you working on? Amelia asked softly. Riley didn't look up. Blueprints. For something I've been planning a long time. Amelia stepped closer and saw that it wasn't for a car. It was a design for a small community workshop, a place where young people could learn mechanical work for free. You're building this? She asked in awe. Riley nodded. Someday. Claire wanted it. She wanted to teach kids who couldn't afford school. Said everyone deserves to know how to fix something, even themselves. She smiled faintly, her eyes distant. I promised her I'd do it. I just never found the courage to start. Amelia stared at the sketches, then at Riley. Then start with me, she said softly. We could build it together. Riley finally looked up, meeting her gaze. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, just studied Amelia's face as though trying to decide if she meant it. Then slowly she nodded. All right, she said quietly. Together. They worked side by side for hours, drafting ideas, listing tools, sketching layouts on old pieces of cardboard. The air between them shifted, no longer heavy with sorrow but alive with purpose. When Amelia laughed at one of Riley's crooked drawings, Riley didn't hide her smile this time. As dawn crept in through the windows, painting the garage in pale gold, Amelia leaned back and whispered, "You know, Riley, I think your sister would be proud of you." Riley didn't answer immediately. She looked at the sketches, then at Amelia, and finally said, "Maybe she sent you to remind me." The words hung in the air, quiet but full of meaning. For the first time in years, Riley looked lighter, as if a piece of her heart had finally been unburdened. When Amelia closed her eyes that morning, exhausted but happy, she realized that the woman who had once been a stranger had become something else entirely, not just a savior in a storm, but a mirror of everything she wanted to become, strong, kind, and unafraid to rebuild even the most broken parts of life. The past that never stays buried. The first light of dawn poured into the garage like liquid gold, illuminating the tools, the oil stains, and the quiet promise that lingered in the air. Amelia woke with a start, her back stiff from the cot, but her spirit oddly refreshed. The memory of the night before drifted through her mind, blueprints, laughter, the faint sound of Riley's voice as she said, "Together." It had been a long time since Amelia had felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to survival. For so long, she had existed in motion, running from failure, from disappointment, from herself. But here, surrounded by grease, bolts, and broken engines, she felt something she hadn't in years. Stillness that didn't feel like defeat. Riley was already awake, of course. She always was. The sound of clinking metal echoed faintly as Amelia stepped into the main workshop, her bare feet padding quietly across the cold floor. Riley stood near the open hood of an old red truck, her hands steady, her expression focused. She looked up briefly, her eyes softening when she saw Amelia. "Morning," she murmured. "Morning," Amelia replied, pulling on a jacket. "You ever sleep?" Riley smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but mornings like this I'd rather work. Keeps my mind quiet," Amelia understood. She'd been learning that silence wasn't always emptiness. Sometimes it was peace wearing a quiet disguise. They worked side by side for most of the morning. Amelia handed tools, cleaned parts, and asked questions she never thought she'd care about. The difference between a torque wrench and a socket, the way a carburetor breathed air into life, the music hidden inside machinery. Riley answered patiently, her tone low and calm, never once making Amelia feel foolish. There was something sacred about the way Riley treated every task, as if each bolt tightened, each wire connected, was an act of reverence to the idea of rebuilding. By noon, the small-town sun had warmed the edges of the world, and the air smelled faintly of gasoline and rain-soaked earth. Amelia had begun to enjoy the rhythm, the work, the laughter, the quiet in-between moments. But just as peace had started to feel normal, life, as always, decided to test its fragility. A black car pulled into the lot, sleek, out of place, and humming with the kind of energy that didn't belong in a place like Riley's auto service. The engine cut and a woman stepped out. She was polished, composed, the kind of person who looked like she'd never gotten her hands dirty a day in her life. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she approached. Amelia glanced at Riley, whose entire posture changed, her shoulders tightened, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. The woman smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's been a long time, Riley." Riley wiped her hands on a rag slowly. "Too long," she said, her tone flat. Amelia looked between them, confused. The woman extended a manicured hand. "I'm Dana, Claire's old friend." "You probably don't remember me." Riley didn't shake her hand. "I remember." Dana looked around the garage, her expression tight with something between judgment and nostalgia. "Claire used to talk about this place all the time," she said softly. "She loved what you were building here. She believed you'd make it something special." Riley's jaw clenched. "She believed in a lot of things," she said, turning away. Amelia felt the tension like a physical force in the room. She stepped forward slightly, unsure whether to speak. You knew Riley's sister? She asked carefully. Dana nodded. We went to school together. She was one of my closest friends. We were supposed to meet the day she— Dana stopped, her voice catching. But she never showed up. When I heard she'd been in an accident, I tried to reach Riley, but— Her eyes flicked toward Riley again. She wouldn't take my calls. Riley didn't look at her. There wasn't much to say. For a long, heavy moment, silence filled the room. Then Dana sighed, her tone softening. I didn't come here to reopen old wounds. I came because I found something. It belonged to Claire. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, worn around the edges, as if it had been carried for years. She held it out toward Riley. I think she meant it for you. Riley hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she took the envelope. Her name was written across it in soft, looping handwriting that looked faded, but unmistakable. Riley. Amelia watched as Riley's thumb brushed across the letters like they were fragile glass. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she stared at it for a long time, her breath uneven. Dana shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Amelia before stepping back. I'll leave you two alone, she said softly. Take care of yourself, Riley. When she left, the silence felt louder than before. Riley finally sat down, her body heavy with the weight of something she hadn't faced in years. Amelia knelt beside her, her hand hovering near Riley's arm. Do you want me to stay? She asked gently. Riley nodded once. The envelope opened slowly, carefully, like an old wound being peeled open. Inside was a folded piece of paper, the edges yellowed with time. Riley unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was neat but rushed, the kind of writing done by someone who had too much to say and not enough time. Riley, if you're reading this, I didn't make it to you. I don't know what happened, but I need you to know this. I was never angry. You were always the strongest of us, even when you didn't believe it. I wanted you to live your life, not carry mine. You were meant to build things, not bury yourself in what you've lost. I love you, and I forgive you. Please do the same for yourself. Claire, when Riley finished reading, her shoulders shook. She didn't sob loudly. She wasn't the kind of person who broke in public. But a single tear traced down her cheek, landing on the oil-stained floor. Amelia didn't say a word. She just reached out and took her hand, holding it quietly, her thumb brushing against the back of Riley's palm in slow, grounding circles. Minutes passed before Riley finally spoke. I spent 3 years punishing myself for something I couldn't change, she whispered. All this time I thought I owed her my guilt. But maybe I just owed her my life. Amelia squeezed her hand gently. Then give her that. Live for her. And for you. Riley looked at her, and for the first time since Amelia had met her, the walls around her eyes softened completely. You sound like her, she said quietly. You really do. That night, neither of them spoke much. They sat outside the garage on 2 old crates, watching the sunset stretch across the horizon. The world was painted in soft pinks and golds, the kind of sky that seemed to forgive everything. Riley held the letter in her lap, folded neatly again, like a sacred relic. Amelia leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees. She wanted you to build that workshop, didn't she? Riley nodded slowly. Yeah, and for the first time I think I can. Amelia smiled faintly. Then let's do it. Not tomorrow. Not someday, now. Riley turned to look at her, the light catching in her eyes. You really don't give up, do you? Neither do you, Amelia replied softly. The following weeks were a blur of motion and purpose. The garage transformed into something alive. Riley and Amelia began clearing out the back room, setting up shelves, sorting through old tools and machines. Word spread through town. The mechanic who had worked alone for years was finally opening her doors to others. Teenagers who had nowhere to go after school started showing up. Riley taught them how to hold a wrench, how to listen to an engine, how to respect work. Amelia handled the paperwork, the schedules, the designs. Together, they built more than a workshop. They built a sanctuary for second chances. Sometimes, when Riley looked at Amelia across the garage, She saw a reflection of everything she had once lost and everything she had gained since. Amelia wasn't her sister. She wasn't her past. She was something new, a reminder that life, no matter how cruel, could still bring grace through strangers. And Amelia, for her part, found herself slowly shedding the layers of fear she'd carried for so long. Each day she spent there, surrounded by tools and laughter and the quiet hum of engines, reminded her that maybe she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she was just waiting for the right hands to show her how to rebuild. One evening, as the last of the students left and the sun dipped low, Amelia turned to Riley and said softly, "Do you ever think Claire knew this would happen? That her letter would bring you back to life?" Riley smiled faintly, gazing out at the fading sky. "I think she knew someone would. Maybe she just didn't know it would be you." The wind shifted gently, carrying the smell of motor oil and lavender from the workshop, that strange mix of grit and grace that had become their shared language. The light flickered, the world quieted, and for the first time in years, Riley didn't feel haunted when the night came. She felt at peace. The blueprint of forgiveness. Autumn arrived quietly, brushing the small town with the colors of change. The leaves along the highway turned burnt gold and deep amber, swirling across the cracked asphalt like fragments of forgotten stories. Each morning, mist rolled over the fields, and the first sound to cut through it was the low hum of Riley's tools, steady and patient, like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm again. Amelia had been living there for almost 2 months now, though it felt both longer and shorter, as if time itself bent differently inside the garage. The workshop had grown from an idea on cardboard into something tangible, shelves stacked with donated tools, a row of workbenches that smelled faintly of pine, and laughter from the neighborhood kids who came after school. The old radio still played in the corner, sometimes fuzzy, sometimes clear, but always there. It was no longer just Riley's space. It was theirs, a small cathedral of second chances built from grease, forgiveness, and quiet resilience. Amelia balanced her job at the nearby office with her hours at the garage. Each morning she dressed neatly, the faint scent of motor oil still clinging to her jacket, and each evening she returned to find Riley waiting with 2 mugs of coffee and that same half-smile that had become more frequent lately. They didn't talk about what they were becoming. They didn't need to. It wasn't about labels or declarations. It was about belonging. About 2 women who had been strangers beneath a broken engine and had somehow learned to breathe again in the same space. Sometimes Amelia would watch Riley teaching the teenagers, her rough hands guiding theirs as they fitted bolts or replaced filters, and she'd feel a surge of admiration so strong it hurt. There was beauty in seeing someone who once hid from the world slowly open her doors again. One evening, while sorting through boxes of old paperwork in the back office, Amelia stumbled upon a small metal tin, rusted around the edges. She almost ignored it, but curiosity tugged at her. Inside were a few receipts, an old wrench keychain, and a folded document with her last name on it, Brooks. Her breath caught. She unfolded it slowly, the paper fragile from time. It was an employment record dated more than 20 years earlier, from the same auto shop, her father's name listed under client. Amelia froze. She hadn't seen her father in years. He'd left when she was 10, chasing work and never coming back. Her hands trembled as she read further. Project overseen by Claire Matthews. The name struck her like a memory she didn't know she had. She took the paper to Riley, her heart racing. Riley looked at it in silence, her expression unreadable. "Claire worked on your father's car," she said finally. "I remember. He was one of the first customers we ever had." Amelia swallowed hard. Did she ever mention him?" Riley hesitated, then nodded slowly. She said he was kind but sad. Talked about having a daughter he missed. She said he carried a photo in his wallet. A little girl with the same eyes as yours. Amelia's vision blurred for a moment. "He never came back," she whispered. "We waited for months, then years. My mom told me he found another family, but I never believed her. I always thought something must have happened." Riley looked down at the paper again, her brow furrowed. There was an accident a few towns over that same year. A car registered in his name, but no one claimed the body. It was never confirmed. Amelia's heart sank, an ache blooming in her chest that felt both old and new. All this time, I thought he chose to leave us. Riley reached out and placed a steady hand on hers. Sometimes people disappear not because they stop loving you, but because life takes them where love can't reach. The words broke something inside her. Not painfully, but gently, like ice finally cracking under sunlight. She leaned forward slightly, her head bowed, and Riley didn't speak again. She didn't try to fill the silence with empty comfort. She simply stayed there, her hand warm over Amelia's, her presence saying what words could not. You're not alone anymore. Days passed after that discovery, and though Amelia carried the weight of it quietly, she also began to feel lighter in unexpected ways. Knowing the truth, even if incomplete, closed a wound that had never stopped bleeding. She started journaling again in the evenings, her handwriting shaky but alive. Riley noticed the change in her, the way her laughter came more easily, the way her shoulders seemed to rest lower. And yet, beneath the calm, something else was growing between them, a quiet, unspoken closeness that neither of them dared define. One night, a sudden thunderstorm rolled through the town. The wind howled, the lights flickered, and the garage doors rattled against their hinges. The kids had gone home early, and it was just the two of them left. Rain drummed hard against the roof, the air thick with the smell of ozone and oil. Riley was by the window, making sure the vehicles outside were secure, when Amelia's voice broke through the sound of the storm. "Riley," she said softly, her tone uncertain but steady. "Do you ever think some people are sent to us to finish the things we can't finish ourselves?" Riley turned, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe. Or maybe they just remind us who we were before the world taught us to stop trying." Amelia nodded slowly. "Claire sent me to you. I know that now. I think my father did too." She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Riley's across the room. "You built this place to fix engines, but you've been fixing people all along." Riley looked away, embarrassed but touched. "That's giving me too much credit." "No," Amelia said quietly. "It's not enough." Lightning flashed outside, lighting her face in brief, brilliant silver. Riley's heart skipped. Not from the storm, but from the realization that somewhere along the way, this woman who had stumbled into her life on a rainy night had become its calmest light. She crossed the room and sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long while. The thunder rolled, distant and deep, as the storm began to ease. When it finally quieted, Riley stood and retrieved the folded letter from Claire's box. She handed it to Amelia. "Read it again," she said softly. "But this time read it out loud." Amelia unfolded the paper, her voice trembling as she began to speak Claire's words. Words that had once been written out of sorrow, now resonating with grace. "You were meant to build things, not bury yourself in what you've lost." As the last line left her lips, she looked up at Riley and whispered, "Then let's build everything." And they did. Over the next few weeks, their little workshop transformed into something the whole town talked about. Donations came from nearby businesses, parents sent their children to learn, and even the mayor stopped by, promising to help with funding. Riley became the quiet hero of the community again, though she always insisted Amelia was the real miracle. The new sign above the door read, "Claire's Place, a workshop for new beginnings." The first day it opened officially. Riley stood under the sunlight, her arms crossed, trying to hide how much her eyes glistened. Amelia stood beside her, holding a set of old car keys Claire once used, now polished and gleaming. "Looks good," Riley said softly. "It looks alive," Amelia replied. When the ribbon was cut and the first group of young apprentices stepped inside, the garage filled with a sound that hadn't been heard there in years, laughter that echoed off the walls like music. Riley turned slightly, catching Amelia's eye across the crowd. For a moment, everything around them blurred. The people, the noise, the applause. All she saw was the woman who had walked into her life in the rain and never left. That evening, When everyone was gone, they sat on the floor, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and motor oil, the sign above them glowing faintly in the golden light. Amelia rested her head against Riley's shoulder, and for the first time, Riley didn't flinch away from closeness. She let it happen. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was full, brimming with the kind of peace that only comes after years of storms. "You know," Riley murmured, "I used to think I was cursed, that everyone I cared about either left or was taken from me. But now I think maybe I was just waiting for the right person to stay." Amelia smiled softly, her eyes closed. "Then I guess I broke your curse." Riley chuckled under her breath, a sound like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Guess you did." Outside, the night was calm again. The rain that once symbolized their pain had turned into something else, a memory of the moment that brought them together. The neon sign flickered gently, casting a warm glow across the room. Inside the garage that had once been a tomb for guilt, two women sat quietly, not needing promises, not needing definitions, just understanding that healing, in its purest form, is not about forgetting the past. It's about forgiving yourself enough to build something new. The rain that came back. A full year had passed since the night the storm broke over the highway, since the moment Amelia's car gave its final sigh in front of a flickering sign that read, "Riley's Auto Service." What had once been a dim, silent garage on the edge of nowhere was now alive with motion and laughter. The new sign above the doors, "Claire's Place, a workshop for new beginnings," shone each evening like a small lighthouse for anyone who had ever felt lost. Inside, engines purred, hammers rang, and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. The smell of oil, sawdust, and rain mixed into something familiar and oddly comforting. The space that had once held only ghosts now held purpose. And at the heart of it all were Riley Matthews and Amelia Brooks, two women who had started out as strangers and ended up rebuilding not only the garage but their own lives, one piece at a time. Amelia had changed in quiet, radiant ways. The shadows under her eyes were gone. Her laughter came easily now. She had left her temporary office job months ago to work full-time at the workshop, handling community programs, funding proposals, and outreach. Under her care, Claire's Place had become more than just a mechanical school. It had become a home for misfits and dreamers, for the young and the forgotten. Every child who walked through those doors found not just a lesson in gears and bolts, but a story of resilience written into the walls. Riley had changed too. The hardness that once framed her face had softened. She still carried her strength, but it no longer came from walls. It came from peace. When she taught the apprentices, her voice was patient, her jokes subtle, her presence steady. And sometimes when she looked at Amelia across the shop floor, there was a quiet pride in her eyes, a kind of gratitude that words could never hold. That afternoon, the town gathered for the first-year anniversary celebration of Claire's Place. A small crowd filled the lot, faces both familiar and new. Students, parents, townsfolk, and even Dana, Claire's old friend, who had traveled back for the occasion. A banner hung over the entrance, "To the hands that build and the hearts that heal." Riley stood at the front, uncomfortably holding a microphone while Amelia smiled beside her, whispering encouragement under her breath. Riley cleared her throat, her usual composure slipping for a moment as she looked at all those faces watching her. "I'm not much for speeches," she began, her voice rough but sincere. "But I guess I owe you all a few words. When this place started, it was just a garage. It was quiet, empty, and it felt like a tomb for everything I'd lost. Then one night, someone's car broke down outside. She came in out of the rain and she didn't just need her car fixed, she needed somewhere to stop running." Riley's voice softened as she turned slightly toward Amelia. "What I didn't know was that I needed the same thing. I didn't fix her car that night. She fixed me." The crowd was silent except for the soft sound of the wind moving through the banners. Riley continued, her tone trembling with truth. "This workshop isn't just for repairing engines. It's for repairing the people who thought they couldn't start again, Every one of you who's walked through that door has built a part of this place. And I'm grateful for the laughter, for the messes, for the second chances. She paused, her gaze flicking toward the clouds gathering on the horizon. And for my sister, Claire, wherever you are, I kept my promise. Applause filled the air, raw and honest. Amelia's eyes glistened as she stepped forward to wrap an arm around Riley's shoulders. You didn't just keep it, she whispered. You made it grow. Later, after the crowd had thinned and the music faded into the background, the first drops of rain began to fall. The sky had turned a deep silver, and thunder rumbled far away, soft and familiar. Most people ran for cover, laughing as they ducked into cars and shops. But Amelia and Riley stayed outside, standing at the edge of the lot. The rain came down harder, warm and steady, washing over the gravel, darkening the earth. For a moment, it was as if the world had turned back exactly 1 year, to the night it all began. Riley tilted her head back, letting the rain run down her face. Seems the sky remembers, she said quietly. Amelia stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. Maybe it's not reminding us of what we lost, but of what we found. Riley smiled faintly, that rare smile that curved gently, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. You sound like someone who reads too much poetry. And you sound like someone who secretly likes it, Amelia teased. They laughed softly, standing there under the rain that had once marked the lowest point of their lives and now felt like a blessing. The neon sign above them flickered, its reflection dancing on the puddles at their feet. Amelia looked around at everything they had built, the rows of tools, the small offices, the students who now called Riley mentor, the legacy of a woman named Claire, whose spirit lived in every bolt and beam. She thought about her father, too, the man she never got to say goodbye to, and how strange it was that life had led her back here, to the same garage where his name had once been written. Some stories, she realized, don't end. They fold back into each other, creating new beginnings out of old heartbreaks. Riley turned to her then, her voice softer than the rain. You ever think about leaving? Amelia met her gaze, surprised. Leaving? Yeah, Riley said. You're smart, talented. You could run your own office somewhere, build something big. You don't have to stay in this little town. Amelia shook her head, her wet hair clinging to her face. I used to want big things. Big cities, big titles, big dreams. But everything I needed was here. I was just too lost to see it. She reached out, her hand brushing Riley's sleeve gently. Besides, you don't abandon the place that teaches you how to breathe again. For a moment, Riley didn't speak. Then she exhaled, her breath visible in the cool evening air. You always know what to say, Brooks. And you always pretend not to listen, Amelia replied with a small smile. Riley chuckled, shaking her head. Maybe, but I hear every word. They stood in silence as the rain grew softer, the world around them glistening in quiet peace. Inside the workshop, a few of the kids had drawn something on the chalkboard earlier that day. A heart with 2 names inside, Riley and Amelia. Beneath it, one of them had written, The Mechanic and the Girl Who Didn't Leave. When Riley saw it later, she didn't erase it. For once, she let the world say what she couldn't. That night, after the storm passed, they worked side by side again, cleaning up tools, checking on the equipment, closing windows. The air smelled of wet earth and gasoline, of endings and beginnings woven together. As they finished, Amelia turned off the final light and whispered, Remember what you told me the first night I came here? Riley smiled in the dimness. I said a lot of things. You said, Stay with me tonight. Amelia's tone was soft, filled with the memory that started it all. You meant it to keep me safe. But I think you also meant something else. You just didn't know it then. Riley looked at her for a long, quiet moment, the faint glow of the sign reflecting in her eyes. Maybe I did, she admitted. And maybe I still do. Outside, thunder rumbled one last time before the clouds began to drift away. The night settled into calm, the workshop humming faintly in the dark, alive with history and hope. The two of them stood in the open doorway, the rain easing into mist, the cool air carrying the scent of renewal. And as they looked out over the small town that had witnessed their transformation, they both understood something wordless but complete. Sometimes fate doesn't send you miracles wrapped in perfection. It sends you broken engines, wrong turns, and strangers who see the best in you when you've forgotten it yourself. Amelia reached for Riley's hand and held it firmly, her fingers fitting into the spaces that once felt empty. "Let's keep building," she whispered. Riley nodded, her grip steady. "Always." And so, under the same kind of rain that had once marked their lowest night, the mechanic and the woman whose car had broken down stood together, no longer mending pieces of the past, but creating something that would last. A home for the lost, a memory for the healed, and a love quiet enough to survive every storm that might still come.